Way too early lists are just designed to get us talking, and I fell for it again. It's a way too early Wednesday on the podcast daily. That's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. My inbox, Bill, just get this. College Sports Network top 100. If way too early rankings of teams are premature, imagine ranking the top 100 players in college football in February. I will say I actually thought it was a pretty good list, but I'm not going to agree with everything that was in there. Surprise, I'm feeling argumentative about it. Did you happen to catch a gander at this? I know Berm didn't. I'm going to surprise him with it, and I might surprise you too. All right.
I have no idea what you're talking about, so
good.
I'm going to be surprised too.
That's the best kind.
I just Googled this list, and I want to be very clear right off the bat, right off the rip, that Sam Leavitt at number 100 is way too low.
Okay. Yep. Well, we have opinions on number 100. We're off to a great start. I thought that this would be really, just natural.
They've got Iowa's punter two spots ahead of Sam Leavitt.
Well, they also have Michigan's kicker one spot ahead of Max Clair. So we're diving right into it. Ohio State had 5 players in this top 100. And you might say, well, that's not surprising. That's about the right amount. But the 5 that they chose, we might maybe have disagreement with. So I would give you guys, I already gave you the first one. Bill, Max Clair is number 97. Mm-hmm. That probably strikes you about right. But this is maybe where it gets a little bit wonky. The next Ohio State player in the top 100 at number 82 is Edric Houston, which I think in terms of potential, we might all say, yeah, that makes sense. And these guys have given that a lot of thought. But there are some names that I will not be mentioning forward in this conversation from Ohio State in the rankings that make me think they may have been trying a little too hard to squeeze him in.
Yeah, I want to. Who's on the list? I need to know. Edric Houston in the top 100 is interesting because I think he's got a chance to really blossom into a star. So that's actually some pretty good forward thinking there because I don't think you'd see him on a lot of a top 100 list, and I'm sure it's just based off recruiting rankings. But he's actually good. So even if it was not the best methodology, they actually landed on something interesting there.
I'll give you the total.
Yeah, who else is on there? Yeah, I need to know.
So number 97. And the 5th highest ranked Buckeye, it was Max Clair, which he's not played at Ohio State. That is based obviously off of his production at Purdue. Edric Houston was the 4th ranked Ohio State player in the top 100. Again, that's off potential. Number 67 was the next Ohio State player to check in. That was Jermaine Matthews. Okay. Then there is a very lengthy and long climb to the top where number 3 is Caleb Downs. Okay. And number 2, it's not an Ohio State player. It's Dylan Stewart. So we may be able to, pierce that argument together if we want between the best defensive player in the country. And in a shock of all shocks, Jeremiah Smith is the number 1 returning player in college football. So Max Clair, Edric Houston, Jermaine Matthews, Caleb Downs, and Jeremiah Smith. Probably not the 5 that I would have imagined.
Okay, I'm just looking at this list. Number 1, there's no author. Okay, I don't know whose list this is.
It's College Sports Network, baby.
Okay, but who's in charge of this? Because I feel like things are not being presented in a manner that I can agree with. Danny Dennis.
I don't know. They had my email, so they
Danny
must
Dennis
be
is 3 spots behind Edric Houston, for example. And while I think Jermaine Matthews is certainly going to be a good player for Ohio State, he's not a starter from last year. And someone like Sonny Styles isn't on the list, and that's ludicrous. So all in all, this is nuts. How many tight ends are ahead of Max Clair, who's the best tight end in the country?
I don't know. I didn't break it down like that.
We've got Luke.
It looks like 4.
Luke Haas at Ole Miss is 83. Luke Haas is this his 3rd school or 2nd school this year? I know he played at Arkansas, so. Boy, this list.
This is exactly the kind of authentic reaction.
Eli Stowers at Vanderbilt is at 71 as a tight end. This is nuts.
I know that the inclination will be, well, this is a podcast that talks about Ohio State. Of course, you might think that there need to be more Buckeyes in there, and I'd say that's true. But also, they're the best roster in America. They probably have more than 5 of the best 100 players in America. They probably have like at least 10, and putting punters and kickers in there, well, I think is an admirable effort. probably is unnecessary if it comes at the exclusion of, I don't know, Sonny Styles.
They've got a guy transferring from Ball State to Wisconsin as a tight end, as the number 36 returning player in the country.
He's good.
I know he's
Derek
good.
Ozio. Yeah.
I know he's good. But who's throwing in the ball at Wisconsin? How do you have a player like that 60
This
spots
year
ahead
it's
of
the guy
Max
from
Clare?
Maryland.
I don't know, man. You have him 60 spots ahead of Max Clare? That's pretty nuts.
That's pretty nuts. Yeah. Yeah, I don't like this list. Why'd you make me read this list that makes me angry?
Because I thought it might be a fun exercise in the middle of the week to get our argumentative juices flowing, and then suggest where they could have improved for Ohio State players, and maybe who you would have as the 5 most important players, knowing that they got the top 2 right.
Sure.
Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs is correct. From there, I think it gets borderline strange.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sonny Styles is, at the very least, should be in the conversation to be in a list like this. If I'm ranking players for next year, I think he's in my top 5. I think Carnell Tate's in my top 5. Maybe that, like, it's odd. I guess in the end, you probably could be proven correct if you're going to rank Jermaine Matthews and not Davis Igbinosun. But it's odd to me to like do that preemptively based off how much those guys have both played and how good Davison's been aside from the penalties. But I think like the biggest omissions would have to be Sonny Styles and Carnell Tate.
I mean, I tried to do that with Jermaine Matthews last year and then wound up being proven pretty incorrect. I still think that Jermaine Matthews probably more likely to be more important or have a higher ceiling than Davison Igbinosun personally, but Davison might prove me wrong for the second year in a row this year. You look at his actual production the last 2 years as a starter, and even what he did in year 1 as a freshman at Ole Miss, I don't know how you could leave him out of the top 100 entirely, even if we're sitting here covering Ohio State and having a maybe spirited argument between who might have a better season, or at least me. I mean, I think the resume to this point for Davison Igbinosun is like pretty clear on the upside. We know what the weaknesses are, but Ohio State has not looked at the penalties like, oh, got to pull him out of the lineup because he's still doing things that few corners in the country can do. So I actually had Sonny Styles is the biggest omission by far, but I actually had a pretty big problem with the Davison Igbinosun lack of rating as well.
Yeah. There are, looks like 6 corners or so on this list. I would say that Davison Igbinosun is probably among the top like 8 to 10 returning cornerbacks in college football. So yeah, I would have had him on here for sure.
I'm looking at this list. I mean,
I think Berm has been sent into stunned silence, which is great content.
Arch Manning is listed as the number 3 overall quarterback and the number 16 returning player, 16 spots ahead of Garrett Nussmeier at LSU. Like, I understand the reason people think Arch Manning might be a good quarterback down the road, but in what world has he proven that? Drew Aller being quarterback number 1 on this list, this is insane. This is insanity. Who wrote this list? Give me names.
I don't know. The email I got said College Sports Network, and I thought, this is interesting, because I thought initially it's like they seem to put a lot of thought into this by including Edric Houston, and that's what maybe duped me. It's like, they're speaking my language. They've got Edric Houston in the top 100, and then I just kept scrolling, like, where are the rest of the Buckeyes? Where this is still one of the best returning rosters in college football, even with all the players they lost. And I thought, this is so puzzling. I need to share this experience with Bill and Berm. And I should have maybe let you read it beforehand, but I just still think this is better because it is like borderline crazy.
The author, his name's at the bottom. He's from England.
Oh, okay. So that's the thing. He thought this
But
was.
he's got the Pop-Tart Bowl logo or mascot in his Twitter banner. So that means he likes college football.
I thought this meant that he was judging these players as soccer players.
Well, Hero Canoe would be number 1.
Did you? I mean, if we're just going to completely deviate from the topic here for a second, and NCAA 2025 and their ultimate team thing right now, they have like the name game or the best names in the country, and Hero is one of the 3 players that they're spotlighting, and it's weird seeing him in like Texas garb.
Texas legend Hero Canoe.
Hero Canoe.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that we've maybe not talked enough about the impact of Ohio State losing him because, there is such high hopes for a tandem with Caden McDonald and Edric Houston, who is CSN's number 82 player in college football. But, you look at the depth there, and Bill and I talked about this on the Daily on Tuesday, where that might be a spot that has to potentially be addressed in the April portal window for Ohio State if something materializes. And we don't know exactly what this is going to look like in, a Matt Patricia defense, if there's more odd fronts, if they don't feel like that's necessary or mandatory for them to address. We're going to find that out as we go. And I think it'll become pretty clear midway through March, or I guess later in March, midway through camp, almost into April at this point with the way the schedule's set up. But, if we were thinking about a traditional 4 down Ohio State front, losing Hero was a pretty big blow as the most veteran member of that group.
And if you're going to want to play odd fronts, like you need a couple 300-pounders at tackle, I think, which I don't know that Ohio State has a lot of outside of Caden McDonald. Right?
Yeah. I mean, you're looking at an opportunity there for young guys to step up, but it is, I mean, that position was a major question mark a year ago, depth wise, behind Tyleik and Ty, and then the guy stepped up. And now you look at it, and you're like, man, I don't know who's there behind the Caden McDonald as the presumptive starter. But I think if we're just gonna again completely deviate from the topic of this list, I think this list in tandem with Bill Connolly at ESPN and his returning production thing that he had the other day. He has Ohio State is 101st in the country when it comes to returning production. And then you look at this, and the English only believe Ohio State has 5 of the best players in America. I mean, it does seem to be like a much different bounce back from a national championship than it was a decade ago when you left after the 2014 season and you head into 2015 and you're like, oh, this is actually the team that's supposed to win the national championship. They're supposed to be really good. And you look at this team and you can see how people might have some question marks about whether or not Ohio State is going to be able to restock after that season, because you have 2 of the top 3 players in the country. And I think most people objectively would have Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs as the best 1 or 2 players on offense or defense in the country. But beyond that, it is hard to ask the layman, hey, tell me about this Ohio State roster and who's supposed to be really good, because I don't think the average person knows anything about these guys.
Yeah, I mean, that I was looking through some of the returning production stuff, like of the, was it 5 favorites? There's like 5 or 6 teams that are clearly in a tier by themselves in terms of like betting favorites for the national title, and the only one that's not outside of the top 100 in returning production is Penn State. And I think like Georgia a couple of years ago might have been like 92nd before it won a national title. So like teams like this, if you're in the hundreds, that almost makes sense to me. I think it was more strange that Ohio State was like in the 50s or better the last 3 years, because of the way that they recruit and turn out talent to the NFL draft. So being 101st is actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I think like Michigan coming up its national title was like 130th or something like that. I actually think Ohio State's talent level is being underestimated in this offseason. And I know that they are in the top 5 of like most like way too early, whatever, top 25, but I've also seen, and someone on Subtext, I think, asked about like people insinuating or predicting or theorizing that Ohio State might have like a quote unquote like Michigan style step back from its national title year. And like, I'm not anticipating that. There's still a ton of talent on this team. There's 5 guys that are on this list, and there's probably 8 to 9 that maybe could be on it, should be on it.
Right. But I think the point that I was trying to say is that I don't think a lot of people outside of the immediate Ohio State circle and the Ohio State fan base really knows much about these other guys. So it's like you right. assume Ohio State's going to be a 10 or 11 win team in the regular season because that's just what they do. But I don't think if you asked Joe Schmo in Arkansas, like, hey, who's Ohio State's best players? Said, oh, Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs, and then I don't know anybody else. And I think that's a little bit different than the last few years. And again, I'm trying to compare it to the 2015 season, bouncing off of the national title. And then you can understand maybe why people, I think there's going to be, by the time the season comes around, a pretty great fracture between the people who are like, well, Ohio State's going to be a national title contender because they always are. And the other people who are saying, yeah, but they have a lot of questions that have to answer them. And some people are just going to say, well, those questions always get answered. They always find a way to answer them. So I just, I'm fascinated by this team in general.
The offseason bread is buttered and negging Ohio State, though. You know that.
Well, and that's we talked, and Berm and I talked about that on Three Things Thursday last week. What had got me worked up then, Bill, was the unnecessary shoehorning in of Ohio State as this year's Florida State from the New York Times, which is the most respected college football coverage outlet in the world. So, including England's own CSN, which I find it, because the end of that was like, well, Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith are not going to go 2-10 like Florida State, which obviously they're not, because there are other really good players at Ohio State. But like, I don't, is this going to be the negging Ohio State, as you put it? Like, is this going to be what we hear about for the next couple of months? Or are people going to remember that if you took the blue chip ratio in the rankings and look at, are they going to remember that Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry exist, or that the interior of Ohio State's offensive line is probably got the pieces to be maybe the best in America here, or that Jeremiah Smith has Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis and Mylan Graham and like Max Clare and Will Kazmarek for these talents, for Julian Sayin, who was a 5-star quarterback. Is that realization going to set in, or are we going to have to listen to some of this nonsense like all the way up until August when they switch gears and like, oh, it's number 1 versus number 2, Ohio State and Texas? This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, no, it'll be that what you just described. I think part of it is like national media, and I don't want to paint with a broad brush because some people do a really good job. But I think generally people aren't like getting into the nitty gritty of a roster. Like national writers for the New York Times, I think, have very little idea who Kenyatta Jackson is, right? Or who Brandon Ennis is. So like we have that understanding, and with that, I think like a much better feel for what this team is. And like I don't think any of us are saying like, here comes a repeat, baby, because it's not an easy thing to do. But like Ohio State is not hurting for talent. They have some holes to fill and some questions to answer and jobs to sort out. The chief among them at the quarterback position. But it's not like they
controversy
have nobody. Yeah, there's a quarterback controversy, as Berm said. But like if this team was hurting for talented players, they would have added more than 5 in the transfer portal. So like there's a strong belief in the Woody. I think that they are set up to reload and take another run at it. I think that they are too. I'm not saying they have to or else, but I think a lot of the discussion about this team, until we're close enough to the Texas game for it to matter, will be, here comes a step back for the Buckeyes, because people don't bother to take a look at what this roster actually is.
Well, see, this is the question I had last week, and I guess one I continue to have, because I don't pay attention that much to the national media landscape. Are these same conversations happening at Texas heading into the spring, even though they lost just as many players to the NFL and lost multiple coaches? And like, why is it simply because negging Ohio State turns the dial a little bit more than negging anyone else? Because we are going to head into August at some point with Ohio State and Texas as the number 1 and number 2 teams in the country. And I don't think that either one of those teams has like a clear path without question free or anything like that. I mean, is it simply because the assumption is Arch Manning is going to be the next Manning, or
he is the next Manning?
Well,
I think we're going to have to all
that much is
that.
guaranteed. Yeah.
Well, okay.
But I think, Berm, I mean, the answer is if you look at page view metrics or engagement, like using the name Manning and saying that he's a surefire bet to be great and the next in line for greatness out of the Manning lineage, is going to get you more eyeballs than being skeptical of it. And that may be a unique phenomenon just to Ohio State, where you can say anything about him and you're better off saying something negative if you're the national media to generate the anger and fire of the largest, most passionate fan base in America. Whereas if you can turn around and pat Texas on the back, I think you're probably going to get more people to buy into that. I mean, I wish that wasn't the case, but there's not a lot of skepticism about Texas, despite the number of losses they had and the players that left early for the NFL. And that's just the way of the world. I think part of the reason that I like to talk about some of these things is, in the national narrative about Ohio State, is to counteract it a little bit, but also just to see you respond to it, because I know that you don't pay any attention to it.
I hate it. I hate it so much.
Can I ask y'all a question? Like,
absolutely, you can.
This list. So we have the 5 that are on this list. We've named a couple of others in Davis Igbinosun and Carnell Tate and Sonny Styles. Take all of those names off the board. Who is someone on this current roster that you think would be on that list? I guess removing the obvious answer of Julian saying. Like, who will be among the top 100 players in college football that maybe we haven't talked about or people don't know of yet?
I actually don't think that Julian Sayin should be on there. I guess if we're saying this is a projection list, which it must be for Edric Houston to be on it, and for Arch Manning to be as high as he is, then maybe he should be, based on the fact he's potentially going to be Ohio State's starting quarterback, one of the highest rated prospects in the country at the position. He's going to be, no matter what, one of the most 100 most important college football players. But he hasn't necessarily earned that spot. But I guess if it's projection based, you would have to almost by default include Ohio State's quarterback. Even if you just put Julian Sayin or Lincoln Kienholz or Tavian St. Clair, just Ohio State quarterback, that probably belongs somewhere in the top 20. But if we remove that from the conversation, I think, Carson Hensman is someone who's probably earned the right to be in there. And you look at last year and some of the ups and downs from the full-time starting experience in year 2 for him, and say, well, I don't know, has he earned that? Played at a really high level at multiple positions during a playoff run. And I would have thought that most people saw that happen for him. And you're now talking about someone with, almost 2 full years of starting experience based on the number of games that he played, likely being the starting center for Ohio State. That's someone who, if you're thinking about Ohio State's roster and looking at the most impactful players in college football, I think Carson Hensman has earned a spot in there.
I was going to say Carson Hensman because he's going to win the Remington Award next year.
Oh,
so I was going to say Carson Hensman. I swear it. But since Austin,
I believe you.
I think that this list, and the British are huge on talking about transfers from small schools to big schools. As I can see on this list, they are all into it. Ethan Anianwa, I think, as a guy I would maybe put on there just as a, hey, here's someone people should be aware of that he exists. I don't know how Ohio State's presumptive starting left tackle isn't on this list. When he is a guy that some NFL people were talking about as a potential day 2 pick if he were to go to the NFL draft instead of transferring. So I think he'd be on there. And then if I'm going to project forward a name that'll be on this list and a name that people will talk about nationally is going to be Arvell Reese. I don't know what he's going to be doing, but the contrast in styles, pun intended, between him and Sonny, I think is going to be really fun to watch for Ohio State fans as you see these two freaks doing very different things, but on the field at the same time. And I think Arvell is going to be a guy that is a highlight reel type player, and people are going to be very fond of him nationally by the end of the year. So those are 2 guys other than Carson Hensman, because again, he's going to win the Remington Award and Ohio State will win back-to-back years.
It's good. It's a good pull. Arvell's a good one. I wasn't thinking of him. I was more thinking offensive line, of course. I think either one of those tackles, I think Onianwa or Philip Daniels, or I think they're both going to play really well. Maybe Daniels is another year away from elevating quite this much, but I think he's got a ton of potential with his athleticism and his frame. It doesn't look like a lot of offensive linemen were getting love on this list, particularly interior offensive linemen. So maybe it could be Hensman, or maybe
the British don't know shit about offensive line play. Let's be clear.
Right. They don't value the trenches, clearly.
They know 2 things.
They would have won. They would have won 1776.
They know crumpets, and I mean Ted Lasso is number 3 on this list. So this is all you need to know. They got the wrong sport.
That's right.
That was where Caleb Downs was. We already covered that part.
Oh,
Ted Lasso is number 2.
I confuse Caleb Downs and Ted Lasso a lot in my head.
It's the mustache, right? Yeah.
Well, maybe this was just a weird Wednesday. I'm sorry. It was my fault because I just saw this list and I thought we needed to talk about it because
who else should be on this list though? I mean, like, where do we go from here as a society if this is what we're allowing to propagate our timelines on a Wednesday?
Well,
where are we?
I think what I learned is that I don't need to ever click open on an email from College Sports Network again. And I did it once and I paid the price, but it did give us a weird, way too early Wednesday episode of the Podcast Daily. And so for that, I'm thankful. We have 3 things Thursday that will be a day away. And then on Friday, guess what? We've recorded another episode of 24 Ever. stories of the national championship Ohio State Buckeyes. And that will be with former Buckeyes offensive line coach Justin Fry. So I think that's why Berm dropped some profanity, is because there's going to be some in that episode. I guarantee it. Parental advisory for episode 3 of 24-Ever. And that's also why maybe I had Carson Hinsman on the brain. I don't know. Just thinking about offensive line.
I had him in the brain because it was the right choice.
Huh?
He belongs on the list.
Okay, well, good. Thank you for the compliment, Berm. And thank you all for joining us on the Podcast Daily for this very strange episode. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I am Austin Ward. We'll talk to you later.